Should I do that now?
Yep.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Qredible Live broadcast. We're joined today, as always, by our CEO and chairman, Brian Fitzpatrick, and we're very excited to have David Vaillencourt here with us again today. For those who haven't watched David's first episode with us, I will reintroduce him. David is a cannabis industry standards expert. He is the founder and CEO of the GMP Collective, the vice chair of Committee D37 on Cannabis for ASTM International, and the co-founder of the Cannabis Compliance Alliance. He's here with us today to discuss the highlights from ASTM Committee Week in Louisville. Thank you so much for being here with us again today, David.
Thanks so much for having me, Taylor and Brian.
Yeah,
just to get us started. Great to have you back.
Just to get us started, could you describe a bit, David, about your background and the event last month?
Yeah, so can't believe it's been 7 years now. It'll be 7 years this year that I've been actively involved in the cannabis industry, background in science and standards, and meeting regulatory best practices, which is no easy feat. Let's just put it that way. Become kind of a standards nerd and love solving industry problems and just helping create marketplaces. So, that was where I got to spend a bit of time with Brian in person back in January down in Louisville. Still working on that pronunciation there, but it was a nice cold week where ASTM International's Committee on Cannabis Standards met. We meet twice a year as part of ASTM's committee weeks. There was rock and soil and concrete and all sorts of other committees there as well. And we had 3 days on site with regulators. The FDA was there. We had Health Canada and the CDC chiming in virtually, both working on, strategically thinking about what does the future of the industry look like? What does 5 years from now look like? And now with that in mind, how do we get there? And it's not about what policies, how do we fix the farm bill? What does, this state statutory problem look like? Or what does the Controlled Substance Act look like? It's more, put the box aside for a second and let's actually create a market relevant framework. And that's the beauty of what ASTM standards and the 125-year-old process creates. So we get to come with global leaders. We had Canada there, we had New Zealand chiming in, to really architect that through a consensus process. And that's what we got to do in Louisville.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And we also got some good bourbon, which seemed like a great place to do so in Louisville. So, but before we get into ASTM, because we're going to talk about what happened in Louisville, and but I really just some brief news on the latest saga, or what I've actually am developing a reality TV series called Politicians in the Weeds. And, there's a new episode of Politicians in the Weeds. It's called Deadline Drama, and it dates back to February 12th, just earlier this week. And it's starring, just wait, Merrick Garland as Attorney General of the U.S., Ann Milgram as lead administrator of the DEA, and special guest appearance by Elizabeth Warren, the Democratic senator from Massachusetts, and 11 other senators from around the country. So in this latest episode of Politicians in the Weeds, tensions rise as deadline looms over the DEA's cannabis rescheduling process. So the situation took a strange, and is this really happening again outcome, similar to the mind-bending twist of the 1959 series of The Twilight Zone. I mean, I just keep feeling like we're going back into the Twilight Zone. So the episode kicks off with all 12 U.S. senators issuing a stern deadline to U.S. AG Merrick Garland and Ann Milgram of the DEA, urging them to take bold action and completely deschedule cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act. So it's a move that goes beyond what we've been talking about, which has been really mere rescheduling, and it now adds a layer of complexity to what is, quite frankly, an already convoluted process. So as that deadline approached this week, the senators demanded answers to 6 critical questions. And what they were trying to do was to really shed light on the DEA's progress and intentions. And what happened on February 12th? Well, nothing. Once again, nothing happened. So much to the chagrin of all those senators and all of us viewers tuning into this never-ending saga from home, right? February 12th comes and goes, and the response from the DEA is absolutely, met with cricket, right? Just, nothing going on there. Absolutely crazy. And, this is commonplace. This is what's happening. So despite months passing since the Department of Health and Human Services recommended rescheduling, not descheduling, but rescheduling, here we are we're still in the same place. So amidst the chaos and frustration, this entire episode is like the last one, with a mix of disbelief and amusement. And we're now treated to the absurdity, once again, of bureaucratic red tape and political maneuvering, all set against the backdrop of a plant and an herb that is completely filled with health benefits. And this all continues to defy classification, this classification logic, shall we call it, and common sense. So, David, will the DEA break its silence eventually and provide the answers everyone seeks? I know you hate being asked that question. We're asked it all the time as well. Or will the drama stretch on indefinitely, leaving once again all of us lost in the weeds? See what I did there? Of uncertainty. So, what do you expect on the next episode of Politicians in the Weeds?
Well, Brian, I hope you didn't pay too much for that pay-per-view episode, because it was kind of a dud. But popcorn's cheap, and just eat it before it goes stale, and keep that as part of your regular diet, because you never know when you're going to have to get the bowl out. And take that bowl for the double entendre as you see fit. But, the DEA is on their timeline, right? Unfortunately, from my understanding, there is no statutory requirement to have this done by X days. I've looked back at the last 4 times that the DEA was presented, whether it was through a citizen's petition or otherwise, to review the scheduling of cannabis, or as it is called in the CSA, marijuana. And that has taken generally 1 to 4 years, depending on the actual case that it was involved in. Now, we've got a little game of politics here, as you've called out with this series, and this was at the request of President Biden and Attorney General Garland, who carried this out. So the operative word expeditiously is what resulted in, I'd say, the FDA and ultimately HHS putting together that 254-page report that was recently unredacted and provided in full for all of us to, I think that was over a long weekend. Yeah, it was that President's Day weekend where I think everybody was grateful to have that extra day off to just comb through the 254 pages. I don't know anybody else in the cannabis industry had much else to do that weekend, but that took a year for them to put together. And I use the analogy that is akin to 10 PhD dissertations done in 1 year. And usually anybody that's gone through a PhD program or has friends or family usually spend the first year figuring out what the hell the problem is and the hypothesis that you're trying to answer and collecting the research, let alone getting the 254-page report out and defended upon. So long way to say the DEA's report is coming any minute now, from my understanding, but minute will that be this quarter?
If any of our viewers or listeners know what expeditious means in DC, please put it in the chat, and we'll try to translate any minute now. But anyway, so as you can tell, we're all frustrated about it, and I know, David, you surround yourself with some smart people, and Shane Pennington is one of those, a partner over at Porter Wright. And, I followed a lot of what he's writing, and, he's indicated that once that proposal drops, there'll be a 60-day window for the public to chime in with their thoughts. So it's not going to happen, real soon. First of all, we have to figure out when it drops. That's the expeditious part, like whatever that means, right? Any day now. And then we have to figure out the 60-day window. So at least kudos to the senators that were leaning on this and saying, hey, get ahead of it. But it's just so political. So enough of that episode. Let's move over to Louisville and let's talk about the ASTM committee week, which was my first ASTM committee week. It delivered everything that was promised that David told me it would. It was a lot of great people, a lot of smart people, very professional individuals from all different aspects of the industry, which was really, really cool to see that out there. But let's talk about some of those work groups and some of the highlights of the event.
Yeah, well, let's even just build on as you cap the lid on rescheduling. There's no time to wait. We can't wait. So what I mean by that is we've got to build the framework, and that's what brings us to ASTM. So while we're waiting on the DEA to make its decision and rulemaking, or while we're waiting for Congress to do something in some weird other universe where they're productive and effective, we have to build the framework so that we can actually have a marketplace. And that's what brought us all to ASTM Committee Week, right? So we've been around since 2017. We had all sorts of, we had task groups. I'm just going to kind of go through the different types of funtivities that happened. We had task groups where pick a problem in the industry. What is THC? How do you define total THC? That's a whole task group. You've got Brian in the room with his lens from your background with mortgages and financial instruments and how important numbers that are based on certainty are. And you've got analytical chemists that are literally sitting on, playing with $200,000 instruments all day of harsh chemicals and reagents to try to optimize these methods. You've got regulators and policymakers that are sitting there saying, how do I translate that into, regulations and enforcement? And how do I understand this? And then you've got operators that are saying, I'm sending my 3 grams of flour into the testing lab that's going to use this method, and this has real business implications for me. So we all kind of have to play this game of finding the compromise of how this works. So that's the root of a task group. And then the task groups fall under our subcommittees. So we've got everything from security and transportation. What's the resolution on a camera for ensuring that plants aren't being diverted, or security protection of a dispensary, to processing and handling. What is an intoxicating cannabinoid? And why does that matter? Does it matter for hemp, marijuana, cannabis? So a lot of higher level conversations and adjudications of these ballot items to get these consensus standards approved are going on there. And then let's actually hang out and get to know each other, because we have a lot to learn from each other. So come to a networking mixer and maybe drink some bourbon. And we had 60, 70 people there, an amazing spread of food, current and former regulators, and just so much discussion was had. And really looking forward to a lot of this. Just cues up for see you in June in your backyard, Brian, in Philadelphia, where we'll be meeting next. And I would say anybody that's here, wondering what really went on in these task groups, and some of this may have sounded interesting, come in June 10th. It's open to everybody.
I can't stress that enough. It was amazing. I mean, David, as you said, the FDA was there. We had different countries represented there. We had so many different aspects of the industry that were represented there. And what was really unique about it, it's funny because I've been in this industry, I guess, since 2018, right? It came from, as everybody knows, it came from the financial services side of this to bring a certain set of skills into this industry. And I've seen a lot of that. I've seen people, because how long has the cannabis industry been around? That it's been around a while, but the legal cannabis structure has not been that old, right? So as from the first states that legalized it in California, Colorado, et cetera. So this is still a nascent industry, right? And what's really cool about it is seeing people from healthcare, people from financial services, people from food safety, people from all different aspects of industry and many sectors coming in to really bring together, a framework that makes sense. And, obviously with experience in the industry and recent experience, We've been helping out with some of the blockchain stuff that's going on. I mean, Qredible built the blockchain 3 years ago. And so it was neat to sort of see what's going on there. But here's the thing is that I was really impressed about it is it's not just, going in there and not being involved. You're actively involved and then you vote. And if you have a no vote, it's okay. They want to find out why you don't agree with something because it's those no's that gets to the something being better, and I was really, really pleasantly surprised with the entire process.
Brian, I'm so glad you guys made it for that experience, and it's one of those that I've been at it for 6 years, so I'm kind of used to it by now. But then you go to other conferences and you realize, back to I think one of your points earlier, like probably I'd argue the smartest people in the industry are there. And smartest, influential, powerful, and dedicated. And when you put that type of a brain trust in the room, and it's not here's a panel with 3 people to talk at you for 30 minutes, but like you said, you're voting, you're rolling up your sleeves, you're speaking what your unfiltered perspective is, that is protected by ASTM's 125 years of bylaws and antitrust statements. That real work gets done. We get to the root of you can't be the voice of no. Brian says, no, I don't like how you've defined CBN as an intoxicating cannabinoid. Prove it. What's your justification for saying no? If you can't come up with a reason, we are going to hold a vote for non-persuasive findings, and it's one interest, one vote. So the balance of interests. I use, an oil and gas in the oil and gas industry. BP, Chevron, name your, big company can come in with as many people and as much money as they want. But when it comes down to that, they get one vote. And that's offset by the votes of EPA and the gas station owners and the gas pump owners. So that's playing out in cannabis to create a marketplace. It's just an incredible brain trust. It's
absolutely, and what is really cool about it is the diverse group that's there representing all these different angles. And by the way, yes, the smartest people were there. It doesn't mean that if you weren't there, you're not smart. It just means that you need to get there because we need those smarts, and I meet a lot of incredibly intelligent people in the industry, and I know some of them weren't there, and it's interesting because I want to personally give them a call and say, hey, you got to show up to the next one. You got to be there. And it was a great event. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with ASTM, there are a number of different work groups. David talked about some of those things that you can put yourself on committees. I think we're probably on 7 or 8 of them. We're on we represent a lot of them, and it is a volunteer effort. So you're not getting paid to go there. You're actually paying to go there. But it's really, really well done, and it's really important for this industry. So, David, the other thing I want to sort of focus on is what we were talking about with descheduling, what we were talking about with standards. Based on the event, based on what we're seeing, based on what's going on in the industry, what do you really foresee in the coming months?
So, getting science on the record, I would say, is one of the most important things at this point. If we go back to the door we closed and peek it open for a minute, since 1970, when the Controlled Substance Act was, enacted, marijuana was put in Schedule 1 pending, scientific evaluation. This is the first time in 54 years, aka ever, that there's been a scientific 8-factor analysis done with a recommendation that looked at all this incredible amount of data. And so we now have the US catching up to the United Nations, let's not forget, who voted in 2020 to reschedule several parts of the cannabis plant. We now have the United States saying cannabis has medical and scientific value for the first time ever. And so what does that mean? It's symbolic, but it's more than that, right? It really sets those dominoes in place to continue what has happened in the last 10 years, 15 years to go to where we have 38 states and plus territories with, some sort of state marketplace. So it opens up the doors. And what I see with rescheduling when that happens is, the 280E removal, when it's at Schedule 3. And that gives a lifeline to the industry to invest. Now, my hope, my ask, my plea is take that money and reinvest it wisely. That is a huge injection, huge shot in the arm. R&D and innovation, right? And developing standards. You want to create the framework to have an interstate marketplace someday, and to also be able to protect yourself from emerging markets that can produce cannabis at 10 cents, 3 cents on the dollar. We live in a global marketplace, so we need to be prepared for that. And there's only one way to do that. It's to develop the market relevant standards. So I see the next 6 months to 5 years being to build that framework. We also can't forget that there's a hemp marketplace, and to say that there's no interstate commerce today, there's a $30 billion marketplace today that is intoxicating hemp products, that is no age gating, that has no testing requirements, no minimum standards, no universal packaging and labeling. And that gets you just as high, if not higher, with who knows what side effects than the state regulated marketplaces. And they don't have to deal with 280E. So they've already got a 60% cost savings advantage on the state regulated marketplace. So that's going to come to a head with the Farm Bill coming up this year. Hopefully that gets resolved, but we've got to think of this as a one plant solution, and products containing cannabinoids protect consumer health before the next, there's a whole nother diatribe we could go in of the history of, why does the FDA even exist? What was happening in 1906 and the 1930s that led to this regulation. We can't be that in the cannabis industry.
Absolutely. And it was really neat to see representation from the FDA there. And, one of their best and brightest who came from New York on the cannabis side was there and, and participated. And, it wasn't just sitting there like a bump on a log, added great value. I mean, tremendous value. And that's really what I saw going on. I mean, we had a former regulator there, which was in one of the big states that did a lot of cleanup. And, it was really neat to hear those different perspectives. But you know what? It all comes down to what you're talking about. It comes down to safety. It comes down to transparency. And I got to tell you, it's like I've been looking at a lot of different things out there in the industry, and it's really confusing, for consumers. It's really confusing for buyers. And then the Wild West is just seeming to get more wild in some of these other types of hemp derivatives, synthetic type, products. And, and I have a personal story of a family member who ended up in an emergency room taking one of those products because the assumption was, well, it's federally legal, right? So it's CBD, but it was one of those Delta products that turned out to be a pure synthetic, not the natural. And the other key thing about that is there was no standards. I mean, the label looked like it was a thing of Lucky Charms, and it's just absolutely crazy. So what you're talking about, David, is absolutely critical, that if we're going to be taken serious in this industry, then and if this industry is going to grow in a very positive way and become a global industry one day, we have to start thinking differently. And the game's changing. That's the really cool thing about watching this. All those things you're talking about, folks, the game's changing. So you really have to play different. I mean, my last company, that was my tagline, because in the industry that I was in, the game was changing so rapidly that you have to play different. And it's funny, seems like I end up in all these different industries because this is where I see opportunity. The game's changing. We've got to play different. And the way we've got to do that is we've got to do that through technology. We have to do that through systems and processes that are scalable, optimized, and repeatable. And that's really what best practices are. You can say you have a best practice, but unless you're putting that into play, and you can talk about standards, but unless you have systems and processes to govern those standards, it's just a document. So I think that's the important thing about where ASTM is working on those critical things that could be put into practice using technology, using quality management systems and technologies. And that's what I see as the tremendous growth growth path, for this industry. So I think it's been incredibly exciting. What else do you, do you suspect that maybe people aren't thinking about that they need to sort of keep an eye on?
Geez, I think a couple of things that come to mind. One is just doubling down on what you just said there, Brian, for a minute, of like, how do you grow? How does any other industry operate? How does any other business operate? You don't have one person with this brain trust of institutional knowledge saying, I think, I feel, and this is why I'm going to make decisions. I'm going to make decisions based on guardrails that provide you a level playing field. And the delta there between what you're doing and what the industry minimum is innovation, right? And that's how you drive forward, continuous improvement. And innovation, you've got to have data, you've got to have systems to scale and operate at that level. And we don't have that right now in the industry, but we're quickly getting there. As you said, we are pushing for maturity. The cotton industry, I'm reminded, took like 90 years to figure this out. So all things considered, we're like 10 years in, we're still babies. We've come a really long way. And yeah, thanks to technology to really accelerate this. So I think the biggest blind spots though really is back to the intoxicating hemp products and other marketplace products. Because as the average consumer go into a store, well, if it's on a store shelf that's not just a bodega, like we're talking gas stations, convenience stores, they must be safe, right? It's next to my Mountain Dew. It's next to my, espresso. Like what could be bad? Doritos, all the sugar. Like how bad could this product be? It's safe, right? It's on a store shelf. False. And so we've really got to think about the optics of what we're getting ourselves into and the risk that every operator has when, I don't care if you're not the one that has the recall, but if somebody else with another product that may be construed as cannabis or cannabinoids containing has a recall, how does that impact your entire reputation? How much more expensive does that make it for you to operate your business?
That's really interesting. I actually participate. I'm a member of an LP, an investment LP that makes investments in various companies, and one of the investments, or some of the investments we've been looking at, are cannabis related firms, and so I get called in, sort of asked to do the due diligence and help with the due diligence of those companies and ask the difficult questions. And I normally ask them, so what's your differentiator in this crowded, and growing marketplace? And, and they always say quality. Like, well, we've got a quality product. And so I said, well, how do I know that? How do your customers going to know that? There's people talk about quality. Well, it's a good, we know how to grow this stuff. Okay, but how do you prove quality? How do you ensure, somebody once asked me years ago, what does best practices mean? And because they all talk about standard, optimized, and repeatable practices, right? Okay, but that's true, but they also have to be able to produce results, positive results, and you have to be able to track those back to what's being produced, so you can actually prove quality in the process and in the end product. And folks, this marketplace is going to get busier. And when you look at some of these states and that are coming online, and there's a good opportunity for wholesale producers and growers in the meantime. But guess what? The more buyers, so the more dispensaries that start coming online, all of a sudden it becomes more crowded and more crowded. So I think that it's going to come down to quality. It's going to come down to the money that comes into this industry are truly going to support those companies that are looking at this differently. They're looking at this of how they can prove quality products and reduce the risk to the investors, right? Because it just takes one big class action lawsuit and you're out of business. So we have to start thinking differently because the game is rapidly changing.
Well, let's be real, right, Brian? Let's think about any other marketplace. Auto manufacturers. How many Ford, GM companies were there at the turn of the 20th century? Hundreds, right? There were something like over 300. What differentiated them? Quality, and then brand awareness that stood for quality, right? Built Ford tough, like a rock, right? You've got all those taglines, but it was a brand recognition. We don't have that today. Consumers are still, I can get high. I can go to the store and get high. Why do you pick product A, B, C, or D? What's the differentiator? There is none, besides maybe the THC percentage, which is a whole nother rabbit hole. I think you've probably had an episode on, or could have 5 episodes on, but that we need true differentiators of quality. And if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If we don't have a way to measure it, a single way to measure it, then we're even further behind. And that's back to the problems we're solving at ASTM to drive consistency. Standardization doesn't mean boring, doesn't mean rigid and stifling innovation. It means a framework to work within. I get on my scale in the bathroom and I know that scale has a tolerance within a certain margin of error. That's what we need. It does. So yeah,
absolutely. And that's a good way to wrap up, because that's really what S3 is about. So the S3 Collective. So why don't you talk about how people can get in touch with you and the work that the S3 Collective is doing, because I think it's very, very important work along these lines.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian. So we're really bridging that gap between the scientific research needed and the standards to inform policy for safety of products. And so I'll be at actually South by Southwest next month giving a talk on this topic. I'll be at MJM Pact in Atlantic City if folks want to meet up with me there in April. I'll also be at NOCO up in Estes Park in April, so come find me. But in the meantime, go to s3collective.org, learn more about us, sign up for our newsletter, consider donating. There's a lot of work that needs to get done. As you mentioned, ASTM is a labor of love and volunteers. We need to get the word out. We need to help folks understand how to survive in this marketplace and future-proof the industry. And that's what we're doing. So we're really excited. We've got a few great partners. You guys have been amazing, but we need more support. And so anything, volunteer expertise, donations, reach out to us, s3collective.org.
Great having you on, as always, David. Thanks so much for all the work you do in this industry, and let's keep on keeping on. Quality job one.
Keep it up. Yep.
All right.
Thanks, Brian.
Take care.